We start today's deep dive with a comment that really resonated. It inspired the article we're looking at by Helen Medeva. It goes like this. Yesterday, my partner shut down during an argument and walked away mid-conversation. I felt a flood of rage and panic. I wanted to follow them, explain, fix, do something. But I remember the advice: respond, don't react. In that moment, staying silent felt like betrayal. I don't know what the right thing is anymore. And if you've ever felt that kind of tension, your body totally alert, every instinct screaming at you to act, while this quiet voice somewhere inside is telling you to stay calm, maybe to surrender, and you just feel lost between those two poles. Well, this deep dive is definitely for you. So this deep dive, it's inspired by that article from Helen Medeva, which actually came out of her conversation with someone feeling exactly that. Like, pausing wasn't just pausing, it felt passive, wrong somehow. Today, we're really exploring what happens when that advice, stay calm or surrender, just feels completely out of reach. And it's not because you don't want peace.
Right. It's because your nervous system, deep down, is in survival mode.
Exactly.
Yeah, and this deep dive is really all about that, how trying to control things outside of us, like other people or how things turn out, can subtly, quietly pull us out of what we call sovereignty.
Sovereignty.
That deep anchored place inside you where your presence, your sense of safety, your clarity, where it all lives. And Helen's article, it uses these characters really effectively to illustrate these ideas, makes them feel very real.
And to help us navigate this inner landscape, we're going to be using the Pathway to Sovereignty framework. It maps out 6 emotional levels. You might also hear it called the staircase to sovereignty.
Yeah, the staircase. And it's important to remember these aren't like steps you have to conquer in order. They're more like patterns.
Yeah.
Patterns to recognize in yourself.
Patterns. Okay.
They show us how we tend to respond kind of automatically when life makes us feel powerless. And maybe more importantly, they show us how we find our way back to alignment within ourselves.
So maybe we should quickly touch on those levels, just so people have a sense of them.
Good idea. Yeah, let's briefly define them. It helps to know what we're talking about as we go deeper. First is survival. This is really primal, where your body just senses threat, like immediate danger.
Got it. Primal threat.
Then there's stability. This is where action becomes the main way you try to feel safe. It can be quite frantic, lots of doing.
Trying to do your way to safety.
Exactly. Then comes self-awareness. Here, you start to actually observe your own patterns, your reactions, maybe without judging them quite so quickly, just noticing.
The noticing stage.
Following that is integrity. This is where you begin to act from what feels true to you, even if it's difficult or uncomfortable, your own truth.
Acting from truth.
Okay, then wholeness. This is a really lovely level. It's where you can start to accept all parts of yourself, even the messy, hard, uncomfortable bits.
Acceptance.
Yeah.
That sounds crucial.
It really is. And finally, freedom. This is where you're moving with clarity, with conscious choice, not just being pushed around by fear anymore.
Wow. Okay. Survival, stability, self-awareness, integrity, wholeness, freedom.
That's the map. And what this framework does so well, I think, is it shows you when you're looking for safety outside yourself, and it gently invites you back inside to anchor there.
So if we circle back to that opening story, the person Helen spoke with, they didn't want to be passive. That felt wrong. But they were also scared, right? Scared that reacting from that place of panic would just make things worse, cause more harm.
Precisely. And that is the absolute heart of it, isn't it? How do you really know if you're surrendering from a place of strength, from that sovereign place inside, or if you're actually just suppressing what you truly feel, just pushing it down?
That's the question. And maybe the deeper invitation here for you listening is this. Can you start to notice when you've kind of left yourself? Abandon your own center in the name of trying to control what's happening out there.
Yeah.
And then the next step, can you return? Not because someone told you to calm down, but because you consciously chose to come home to yourself.
That choice is key.
Okay, so let's dive into this instinct for control. There's this almost quiet kind of fear, isn't there, that creeps in when things don't go according to our plan.
Definitely.
Maybe it shows up as like tension in your jaw all of a sudden, or that knot in your stomach, or you realize you're holding your breath.
Absolutely. And before you even have a conscious thought about it, your body already knows something feels off, unsafe. And that's the moment we reach. We reach for control, for certainty, for anything to make it feel predictable again.
Yeah, like replaying conversations over and over.
Or trying to guess what someone else is thinking, or planning and replanning every possible outcome.
Yeah, trying to manage everything.
We tell ourselves, I'm just being responsible here. But underneath that often is something much more primal. It's a part of you just desperately trying to feel safe again. That's what happens when you step outside what you can actually control. Your body reads that uncertainty as danger.
And is that where something like polyvagal theory comes in? Does it help explain those physical shifts we feel when that happens?
It really does, yeah. Polyvagal theory helps us understand that when we sense a threat, and it doesn't have to be a physical lion, it can be emotional uncertainty, relational tension, our nervous system automatically shifts gears.
Shifts gears.
How? Well, we move out of that calm, connected, regulated state, the ventral vagal state, and we might shift into mobilization, which is that sympathetic nervous system, arousal, thinking, anxiety, anger, that feeling of needing to fight or flee.
Okay, fight or flight.
Or we might go into shutdown, which is the dorsal vagal state, that feeling of collapse, numbness, disconnection, maybe feeling frozen.
So trying to control things we can't actually control. It's often a reaction driven by these nervous system states, a bid for safety.
Exactly. It gives us this illusion of movement, doesn't it? A temporary feeling like we have some power. But trying to control other people or outcomes or the past or the future, these things are fundamentally outside our circle. They aren't ours to carry.
And when we try,
we inevitably fall out of that internal sovereignty and land right back in survival mode.
it's interesting you say land in survival mode. We often think of control as just a thought, right? Like, I need to control this.
We do, but it's so much more visceral than that. Controls is also a sensation. It's the clenching in your jaw you mentioned. It's the racing heart. It might be a kind of frozen stare. Each of those is a physical signal. Your nervous system is trying to manage the perceived threat.
So what can we do then? Practically speaking, when you feel that intense urge, maybe desperation to control what someone thinks or how they react or what's going to happen next, what's the first step?
The crucial first step is just to pause, if you can. Just pause and ask yourself gently, where is this feeling showing up in my body right now?
Just locating it in the body.
Yes. And this simple act of turning your attention inward. It involves a few things. There's introspection, thinking about it. There's interoception, which is your ability to sense internal body signals like your heartbeat or breath. And there's somatic awareness, just noticing the physical sensations like tension or heat.
So tuning in without judgment.
Exactly. Tuning in without immediately trying to fix it or make it go away. That simple act sends a powerful message back to your nervous system and says, okay, you're being listened to. And that quiet listening, that awareness, can begin to loosen the grip of that control impulse. It's really the first step back up the staircase towards sovereignty.
And you mentioned that when we live outside our circle of control, trying to manage the unmanageable, we often land at that first level survival.
That's often where it starts, yes. The body is bracing or chasing or maybe collapsing.
To really make this concrete, let's walk through those two stories from Helen's article. They illustrate this journey so well. Let's start with Mark.
Mark's story, yeah.
His story is about being controlled by opinion, right? He's described as usually composed, reliable, the steady one. But then, after this tense leadership meeting, something shifted.
That's right. The feedback he got wasn't direct criticism. It was unclear, loaded. You know the kind. A tone, a look, a vague comment that just hangs in the air.
Subtle but powerful.
Exactly, and that was all it took. In the days after, Mark just couldn't let it go. He was looping, rereading notes, writing these meticulous emails to explain himself, re-justifying decisions, couldn't sleep, staring at the ceiling, chest tight, replaying it all.
Constantly thinking.
Yeah, and his thoughts kept circling this one core question. What do they think of me now? And this wasn't just about the meeting. It tapped into this much deeper, older ache, this need he had to be seen as competent, as good, as in control.
So instead of pausing, he went faster.
He did. He tried to sort of get ahead of the perception, manage it with flawless execution, which, is how many of us react when we're triggered. It's rarely this neat linear climb. It's often more of a spiral, revisiting these layers.
So where did that initial reaction land, Mark, on the pathway?
Yeah.
At overdrive.
Right down at the bottom. Survival, complete powerlessness. His nervous system was just buzzing, high alert, shallow breath, tense muscles, hypervigilant about tone and optics. He wasn't leading anymore, he was bracing, trying desperately to control their opinions, something totally outside his circle, and in doing that, he lost touch with himself.
But there was a turning point.
There was, a small one. One sleepless night, he just whispered it out loud. What am I afraid they are seeing in me? And just asking that question, something softened a little. He started to feel the fear underneath the performance, not as something to push through, but maybe something to meet. That was the first tiny return.
But even after that moment of awareness, the old patterns kick back in, leading him to the next level.
Yes, the instinct to act was still strong, so he moved into stability reactive power. This often looks like getting busy.
Or do.
Yeah, even more doing. More emails, more meetings, more effort. It looked productive on the surface, but underneath, he could feel this frantic energy. He wasn't leading from clarity, he was reacting from fear. It looked like leadership from the outside, maybe. But inside, it felt like panic.
And what helped him see that?
It was actually in therapy. His therapist asked him very gently, what part of you still believes that being perfect will protect you? And those words, they just landed. He went quiet, and then he cried, really feeling the weight of that belief for maybe the first time.
Wow. That question sounds like it opened the door to the next level.
It really did. It marked the beginning of his shift into self-awareness, ego empowerment. He started to notice himself doing it, shaping his behavior, his words, trying to manage how others saw him, not because he was malicious, but from this deep-seated desire to avoid the sting of shame.
He can name the pattern.
Yes, he started naming it. The over-explaining, the perfectionism, avoiding conflict. He saw it wasn't just his communication style, it was a survival strategy. And he started to recognize maybe it didn't serve him anymore.
And as he stayed with that awareness, how did things change? Moving towards integrity.
He actually started showing up differently, moving into integrity, understanding beyond the ego. He began communicating more directly, not to impress or defend himself, but just grounded in his own clarity about the situation.
Less performance.
Much less performance, much more openness. He found himself saying less, but meaning more. And this wasn't about pretending he wasn't affected by things. It was about choosing to honor his own truth instead of constantly trying to manage everyone else's perceptions. He shifted from protecting his reputation to protecting his inner peace.
That's a huge shift.
It is. And over time, something began to change in his body, too. Which brings us to wholeness, spiritual sovereignty.
How did that manifest physically?
That tightness in his chest started to ease up. His breath naturally got deeper, more relaxed. He realized he wasn't mentally rehearsing conversations anymore before meetings. That space between the trigger, the stimulus, and his response got wider. He could feel his own presence returning. He started to trust, deep down, that who he was, not just what he defended or achieved, was actually enough.
And the final level, freedom. Was
Yes.
there like a big aha moment?
Not really a single moment, no. More like a quiet choice made again and again. That's freedom transcendent sovereignty. Mark gradually stopped trying so hard to manage how others saw him. He stopped twisting his voice to fit expectations.
She's good led.
He just led from that place of wholeness, not from performance. And in that fundamental shift, his nervous system found room to really settle. His mind quieted down. His body felt like it came home. He wasn't trying to be perceived a certain way anymore. He was just being himself, anchored, aligned, and, free.
That's a powerful journey. Now let's turn to Lena's story. Hers highlights that obsession with outcomes, right?
Yes, Lina's story is about getting caught in the need for a specific result. She's described as deeply driven, creative. After years supporting other people's projects, she finally launched her own, poured months of care into it. It felt like a real arrival for her.
Clicking publish must have felt amazing.
Quiet pride, yeah. But then, silence. She'd anticipated messages, engagement, something, but mostly crickets. A few polite notes, but nothing more. And the longer she waited, the more that silence seemed to grow, to become heavy.
Oh no.
Yeah, the project started to feel less like her creation and more like evidence that something was fundamentally lacking in her. She became obsessed with checking her email, her analytics. Her jaw was clenched constantly until it actually ached.
Trying to figure it out, fix it.
Exactly that thought. If I can just figure out what's not working, maybe I can fix this. But underneath that was this deeper fear that her worth was totally conditional on being received well by the world, and this is where survival started to take over, and she didn't even realize it was happening.
So that primal voice kicked in again, landing
Yeah.
her in.
Survival, complete powerlessness. Inside her, this voice rose up insisting you're not safe. It told her she had to act, couldn't stop, had to repair the situation at all costs. Her sympathetic nervous system just flooded her system with adrenaline, hands trembling as she stared at the metrics.
That sounds intense. Was there a turning point for her, too?
Yes. Similar to Mark, it was a moment of seeing herself. One night, gripping her phone, obsessing, she caught her reflection, and her eyes looked startled, almost like a lost child searching for help. That image just broke the spell for a
A
second.
moment of clarity.
A tiny one. She put the phone down, pressed her hand to her belly, and she just whispered, "I am still here, even when nothing is working." It was the smallest return to herself, but it was a return.
But the next day, the pattern shifted again into stability.
It did. The next day, a different voice took over, pulling her into stability reactive power. This is the voice that insists, if you just do more, you'll feel better.
Oh, the doing again.
Exactly, so she went into overdrive. Overhauled emails, tweaked headlines, rebuilt the design. Each task held this promise of relief, but the relief never lasted. She described it as feeling like drinking water that just left her feeling more thirsty.
Exhausting. What broke that cycle for her?
It was something simple, an unexpected text from a former colleague just saying, "Loved your project, you have always inspired me." That simple, genuine message. It made her pause. And in that pause, she felt how incredibly tense her whole body had been.
She noticed.
She noticed. She realized she'd been treating her work like this test that she had already failed. And in that instant, she saw how completely she had left herself behind in the pursuit of the outcome.
And that pause, that awareness, opened the door to the next level.
It really did. That marked the beginning of self-awareness, observing patterns. Lena started to notice her own patterns almost like an observer watching a familiar play. She saw how quickly her mind defaulted to trying to control outcomes, how her body instantly tensed up. She began to catch herself in the act of over-efforting.
Did she do anything specific with that awareness?
A friend gave her a journal. And one day, Lena just wrote down one question. What am I afraid this failure says about me? Again, it wasn't really the answer that mattered most. It was the honesty of just naming the fear she'd been too afraid to even look at. That created space.
That space sounds crucial for moving into integrity.
It was. Lena knew she needed more space to really reclaim her perspective, so she moved into integrity understanding beyond the ego by consciously choosing to step back. For several days, she didn't check anything, didn't fix anything related to the project.
Just sat with the discomfort.
Yes, she just let the project be unfinished, imperfect, unresolved. And she chose, again and again in those days, just to stay present with how that felt. She realized she didn't have to fight herself constantly to feel worthy. She could feel the fear, acknowledge it, and still decide not to obey its frantic commands.
That feels like a profound shift towards self-acceptance, towards wholeness.
Exactly. In that quieter space, she moved into wholeness, accepting the hard parts. She began to see that her longing to be recognized, to have her work seen. It wasn't wrong or shameful, it was just human.
Accepting the longing itself.
Yes, she allowed herself to accept that part of her, the part that wanted to be seen, the part that wanted to belong, the part that still hoped for appreciation. And when she stopped judging those needs so harshly, she felt her chest soften, her breath deepen. Acceptance became this different kind of fuel, not the frantic fuel for striving, but the quiet fuel for simply being.
So when she finally returned to her project, how was it different, entering freedom?
When Lena came back to it, having reached that place of freedom, transcendent sovereignty, she did so from a completely different place. There was no desperate urgency to be proven right anymore, no compulsion to perfect every last detail.
The work still mattered, but
The work still mattered to her, yes, but it no longer defined her. Her sense of worth wasn't tied to its reception anymore. She continued creating, but with presence, with a sense of inner grounding. She trusted, truly trusted, that her worth wasn't something the world could give or take away. It was something she had always carried within her.
and if the old fears came up,
She learned to recognize them, like old voices that once tried to keep her safe. She could acknowledge them, maybe even thank them for their past service, and then consciously return to that place of calm she had discovered within herself.
these stories really illustrate how it's not just a mental shift, is it?
Not at all. The climb to sovereignty, as we call it, isn't just about changing your thoughts. It's truly a body-led reclamation. Each level of the pathway invites you to notice your felt experience, what's happening inside your body.
And we move between these levels, right? And
Yeah.
it's not a one-way street.
Absolutely. We all move between levels. The real work isn't about somehow avoiding the fall or never landing in survival again. It's about recognizing where you are when you do land there and knowing how to return. We return by noticing.
So as you've been listening, reflecting on Mark and Lena's journeys, maybe we can offer some reflection prompts for you,
Yeah.
little check-ins you can do.
Good idea. Gentle inquiries.
Like, in those moments of panic or urgency, maybe just ask, what part of me feels like it's in danger right now?
Or what am I trying to control externally right now to feel safer internally?
What pattern am I seeing repeat here in my reaction?
What feels truly honest for me to do or say right now, even if it feels hard?
Can I hold this fear, this discomfort, and still lead myself with presence?
And maybe, what would it feel like to respond from calm rather than force?
Just asking the questions.
Yes. This is that deep introspection we talked about. It's not just thinking about your feelings from a distance. It's about feeling into your patterns,
Yeah.
letting your body guide the shift back towards center.
And please remember, you are not failing because your body sometimes wants to act out of fear or panic. You're human. That's a human response.
Absolutely. And needing to pause, needing that space we talked about, it isn't weakness. It might actually be the very first step back towards your own sovereignty.
Sometimes we really do lose ourselves trying to fix things that aren't actually ours to hold, aren't within our circle.
Mm-hmm.
But the good news is we can return again and again back to the only place where our true power actually lives, which is inside.
Let go of what you cannot hold. Gently. Come home to what you can hold, your body, this present moment. Your body knows the way. Your breath will guide you. Your sovereignty lives right there within your own circle.
Before we finish, just a gentle but important reminder. This framework, the pathway, it's intended for reflection and self-understanding. It is definitely not a replacement for professional therapy or mental health support.
That's really important. If you're feeling overwhelmed by these feelings or patterns, please do reach out for support from a qualified professional.
Absolutely. And if you do want to explore these ideas further and integrate them more deeply, we have a few resources we'd love to share.
Yeah, great resources available.
First, there's a free PDF download of the Pathway to Sovereignty framework itself. You can find the link for that in the first comment below this deep dive. It lays out the levels visually.
Also, the journal by Selfie Seeker, which is called Your Path to Becoming Untriggered, is available on Amazon. It's full of prompts and exercises specifically designed to help you process these kinds of experiences and really connect with your own inner wisdom.
And of course, you can read the full article by Helen Mudiba that inspired today's conversation. It's titled, When Control Feels Like Protection But Costs You Your Power. And it goes into even more depth with Mark and Lena's stories and the underlying concepts.
Really recommend reading that if this resonated.
Definitely. All valuable ways to continue this exploration.